My God, why have you forsaken me? An examination of what happened on the cross by Malcolm Bowden. For thinking Christians, the most disturbing and thought-provoking cry that Christ made when on the cross was, my God, why have you forsaken me?" as recorded in Mark 15 verse 34 and Matthew 27 verse 46. Why did God forsake him when he was on the cross, and what actually happened on the cross? I have always found these words both disturbing and intriguing. There are three different aspects of those words that raise questions for Christians. 1. The fact that God the Father did leave him on the cross. 2. Why did he do so? 3. That Christ did not expect this to take place, hence he asked it as a question, why God left him. This raises a further two questions. 1. What did actually take place on the cross? 2. What was the new situation Christ found himself in? Now in this video I will try to give a reason for what lay behind that heartfelt cry by Christ. Let us go back to that very important moment, indeed cosmic in its significance, when Adam took the forbidden fruit and disobeyed God's very clear commandment not to eat it. All the world's sins and the ensuing chaos in the world have stemmed from that one simple act of disobedience. If nothing else, it surely highlights the very important subject that any ignoring of God's commands, even the smallest ones, can have consequences that are much, much more serious than we can ever imagine. Indeed, in Matthew 5 verse 19, Christ said, "Whosoever therefore shall break one of the least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Now it is very important to see the test that God set Adam could be seen by everybody. The actual act of eating the forbidden fruit was above all an act. It was not just a bad thought that could be hidden from others. When Adam ate the fruit, it was an act that all involved could witness as definitely having taken place. Now the crucial feature of this whole event was that Adam was free to sin, to disobey God. This needs to be kept in mind for the rest of this video. Now let us look at the crucifixion itself. Christ was closely bound to God the Father. In John 10 verse 30 he said, "I and my Father are one." In John 14 verse 9 he said, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." In John 8:29, "And he that sent me is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please him." This very close connection between the Father and the Son always applied throughout his 3.5 years of ministry, travelling throughout Israel. But now, at some time during the crucifixion, the Father unexpectedly leaves Christ on his own. Why did he do so? I will try to answer that important question. Now the union between Christ and the Father is an especially close one and is known as the hypostatic union. It is an especially close relationship between an infinite God and a limited human being. We do know that it was not fully complete because there were some things that the Father did not reveal to the Son. The date that Christ would return to earth, for example. It did mean that Christ could do miracles. It also meant that Christ could do no sin. He was unable to sin because he was God. Now that is an important factor in all that follows. So now let us look at the events that took place during the crucifixion. Now we do not know exactly when God the Father left the person of God the Son, but it must have been some time just before he was nailed to the cross, or during that time. The time is not important. What is important is that God did leave him to face this terrible ordeal on his own. Why was this? I come back to the fact that Adam chose by his own decision alone to disobey God. Yes, he was tempted to do so by Satan, but he nevertheless made the final decision to disobey God and eat the forbidden fruit. So now we come to the point. What was Christ's situation on the cross? Now let me assure you that this is not just a casual thought I have just simply cooked up in trying to probe into matters that are too speculative. This was actually carefully considered by the very early fathers of the Christian faith many years ago. The language they used that allowed them to communicate with other theologians in other countries was Latin, and they expressed this particular theological question with two Latin tags or sayings that expressed it very neatly. The question they asked was, could Christ sin and come down from the cross, or could he not sin and could only continue to hang there? So I'm putting up these two Latin tags which are easy to remember, as I think they will help to fix the subject in your mind. The two tags are: non posse peccare, it was not possible for him to sin, he was still God and therefore perfect and could not sin. Posse non peccare, it was possible for him not to sin, opening up the possibility that it was possible for him to sin. Now let me return to the New Testament. It is written in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 45, the first man Adam became a living being, the last Adam, that is Christ, a life-giving spirit. Now it is important to note that in this passage they are closely compared and are in some way associated, one being the first of a kind and the other being the second of the same kind. Now Adam could sin and did sin. Now strictly speaking, we cannot say that Christ was in exactly the same position as Adam, who could sin and did sin. However, surely to be truly a second Adam, that is, in the same position as Adam, he had to be in a position that he could have come down from the cross had he decided to do so. But what about the hypostatic union, in which he was truly God and therefore could not sin? Surely the answer to this is obvious. When the Father left the Son on his own, that union was broken. God took from Christ not only his presence, but crucially the godly inability to sin, leaving him able to sin. If this were not so, then he would not have been a truly second Adam who was able to sin. This means that Christ really could have come down from the cross had he so decided, but that would have meant that the final salvation of God's chosen people would never have been achieved, and we would have been condemned to hell along with untold millions of others. So let us see what was going on. I will not embark on a chilling description of the horrific pain that crucifixion applied to those who suffered this extreme form of death. This is well documented elsewhere, but I will mention just one feature. The nails were not driven through the palm of the hand. it could too easily tear through the flesh between the fingers. They were driven through the wrist bones. This was particularly painful, as all the nerves on the tips of the fingers were collected into a bundle called the median nerve. Now just imagine the pain that Christ experienced in both wrists when those nerves were completely severed by a large rusty nail driven into his wrists by a Roman soldier. Crucified victims could survive for 2 or 3 days, writhing in agony all the time. Indeed, crucifixion was such a degrading thing that it was never discussed in polite Roman circles. And that was what Christ voluntarily went through when he could have come down from the cross, but refused to do so. Why did he not come down? Because he knew he was paying the price of your sin and mine whenever we hurt our holy and loving God by any sin, both large and small. It was the only way that the eternal scales of justice could be rebalanced. An infinite God had been offended, and the only way that that could be put right was by the punishment and sacrifice of an infinite person. Christ took the punishment that we deserved. Let me here point out just how seriously God regards sin. He was prepared to punish his own dearly beloved Son, so that some of us rebellious humans could be reconciled once again with a holy and loving God. Does not our heart cry out, "Oh, the depths and the riches of our loving God! They are truly past finding out." Surely this realization that Christ resisted the temptation for our sakes calls forth an even greater love for him than we have ever had before. Adam was free to sin, to disobey God.